Hey everyone, it's the Manga Viewer, and today we'll be talking about how powerful Deku really is. Now, don't worry, I won't be diving into the manga spoilers until like the latest part or like at the end of the part of the video, so I'll be warning you by then, but for the majority of this video, it's spoiler free, so you don't have to worry. Alright, let's kick off. Now, I want to make it perfectly clear because a lot of people seem to jump the gun and be like, current Deku is more powerful than Prime All Might, which is not true. Deku is still learning all the quirks. Now, I'm not trying to like lowball Deku or like trying to nerf him or anything. I just wanted to make that statement at the beginning of the video so that like when I go on to explain his status and what basically he's being able to do and how powerful he really is, I want you guys to know that this is why he's really that powerful. Now, the first thing that I want to point out is basically Deku's mind. Without even his quirks, Deku is pretty damn smart. Even sometimes more smart than All Might or the UA teachers. And we can see that like from the beginning, from Season 1 at the USJ arc, when All Might was trapped by the USJ Nomu, and Deku rushed in knowing fully well that All Might is about, to get like crushed, so he wanted to rush in and help and save as much time as possible. Now let's talk one for all. We know that the Vigilante Deku, of basically like the current one we saw in Season 6, don't worry, no manga spoilers, was basically being able to use 45% of One for All, and basically like he used that to knock, the muscle villain that he fought in Season 3. Which means that the 100% that he used, not even the 100%, the 1,000,000%, which basically, to clarify, it's not basically a 1,000,000%, it's kind of like a double smash in some sort of thing, because we can see him saying Delaware Detroit Smash. He combined the Delaware Punch with the Detroit Smash, and he basically created that to knock Muscular out. Now, we saw that happening in Season 6, but he's not using 100%, or he's not using double smashes, he's just using one smash, and it's basically just like 45%. And that was enough to like knock Muscular out of basically conscious. He was also able to basically kind of like stop Shigaraki's decay at 45%, so he's actually pretty powerful in terms of like One for All alone. Okay, so in terms of Black Whip, which is pretty interesting, and we actually saw a lot of action happening in Black Whip in the third movie of My Hero Academia, which is basically the World Heroes movie. And I think that was intentional on like Hirokoshi's part, because he wanted to show, the audience how Deku is kind of like using Black Whip. And I think the closest thing we can like compare it to is basically Spider-Man. We know that Hirokoshi is a huge Marvel fan, and basically Black Whip is kind of like this amazing thing that Deku have to use. Because here's the thing, we know that Deku's body is fragile. It's not pretty strong. It took Deku like 2 seasons to reach like 5%, and then like him kind of like every time he uses 100% his arms break. And that's not just because One for All is powerful, it's also because Deku's body is not strong enough to handle the impact yet. So that's pretty interesting, which comes in Black Whip. And here's the interesting part. Black Whip is not just used for like, being able to travel from like a place to another or dodge or something. It can also be used to kind of like cover the arms and kind of like hold the arms or the bones together. And we actually saw that from Deku's perspective in the War arc, when he was basically fighting Shigaraki and his arms broke because of like the impacts of the multiple smashes that he did. He was being able to use Black Whip to kind of like go on and on and on until like he was basically knocked unconscious because of the impact when he went to the One for All world. And I think that's pretty interesting. He also used it in a stealthy way to get off of the top assassin herself, Nagant, Lady Nagant, when he was basically like releasing multiple items from himself so that he can distract her and then go and take the win. So that's pretty interesting. So we know that Black Whip on its own is pretty interesting. It can like also be used to kind of like catch stuff and combined like with his float quirk, which I'm gonna break down soon. But that's pretty interesting because Black Whip can like take cars, trucks, people, whatever you throw at it. It can basically like catch and can like grab in some sort of way. So it's used in multiple ways, which I think is pretty interesting from Deku's perspective. He can use it as like a shield for his body. He can use it as like a catchy thing to catch the civilians, or like catch an item and throw it at the villain, for example. Or he can use it to travel from a place to place or dodge, basically. because if Black Whip can come out of like anywhere of his body, not just like his arms, because we saw that, he can basically kind of like dodge from like his waist and stuff if a bullet is coming through, or like an attack villain or anything. Which brings us on to the next quirk, which is basically Float, and that will be like a really short one, but it's really interesting because the Float quirk enables Deku to kind of like float himself and other people with him as well. Not like Uraraka, but sort of like if he just like floats himself and like he catches the other people with like Black Whip, he can basically let them float, which basically what he did with the War Arc, which is pretty interesting. Now that's pretty cool because like in All Might days, he was basically just using his wind pressure to kind of like fly around and go to places. But in Deku's case, he just have to float, maybe use a little bit of One for All or Black Whip, and he will be there no time soon, right? Which brings us to the next quirk, which is basically Danger Sense. Now that's a pretty interesting one, because in All Might days, and I'm trying to compare Deku to All Might because I think that's a pretty interesting point at the end of the story when Deku is basically a full-fledged pro hero, and you can compare him like finally to All Might and how he was actually like handling situations. In All Might case, he doesn't have a danger sense, he just have to act like upon his senses. He doesn't have a trigger to tell him like, oh, there is kind of like a spider sense, like there is a danger coming. So I think that's pretty interesting because imagine just Deku using his danger sense to dodge the attacks and know what's going to happen next, similar to like the Haki in One Piece, which I know is pretty further away like from the argument here, but I think it's pretty interesting. And like Deku using his danger sense, his Black Whip, his One for All, and like his floating quirk all together, that's pretty interesting on its own. And which brings us to the next quirk, which is basically Smokescreen. I feel like on terms of like Deku's fighting style, it's pretty different from All Might fighting style. All Might will just go in and like freaking destroy a city, right? Like he will just like one-shot a villain with like raw power alone. But in Deku's case, he's more of like a stealthy type character. He still haven't managed to master One for All yet, so he needs those stealth quirk, which I think is pretty interesting for him. And basically like for the other guys that had One for All before him, because like in terms of like Danger Sense or the Smoke Screen, which basically I'm gonna bring out right now, which I think is pretty interesting. So in terms of like Smoke Screen, he's being able to like cover a huge like chunk of buildings, not even like a city yet, but he's being able like to cover that, and he's not even like fully ready yet. Like he's not even at his prime yet. He's being able to cover like chunks of building to like escape from villains, or like kind of like make it like a stealthy sort of type of mission. So I think that's pretty interesting as well. I feel like when Deku reaches his prime, he might like being able like to even cover like an entire I don't want to say city, but like sort of like a small city sort of thing, like a Camino size maybe, of like just like Smoke Screen, which is pretty interesting. And him being able to like bring out like maybe a whole building from with like just like Black Whip, which it would be pretty interesting because it would kind of like resemble this moment when Superman kind of like took a school and like saved a whole school building. So if that happens like in Deku's prime, I feel like that would also be interesting. Now going off to the next and one of the most important quirks in Deku's, Fujin. Now this quirk, for those of you guys who don't know what it is, it's basically a quirk that can charge energy through constant movement. Let's say you're doing push-ups and you can like charging your body up. That will charge your fusion quirk basically, and you will be able to release it in one hit or like two hits. In Deku's in Deku's perspective, or in Deku's time, he's basically being able to have two shots, as we saw like in the Lady Nagant's fight. If you charge your body, you get to have two shots, unless like you recharge your body with like constant movement again. So that's why he was doing like those constant squats, so that he can charge his legs and like go at fast speed, so he can like be faster than Nagant's bullet, right? And here's the interesting part, because when Deku used the Fujin quirk and he was like being able to travel faster than a sniper bullet, which is basically like, if you want to like put that in terms of physics perspective, which I'm gonna break down the exact speed of it, Deku was basically able to travel faster than 4,500 kilometers per hour, which is basically faster than sound itself. Now here's the tricky part, because when that moment happened, a lot of people started being like, oh, Deku is faster than Prime All Might, when in fact that's not the case. All Might is faster than light itself by multiple times in his prime state, and I broke that down in my other video of how powerful All Might is, so go check it out before anyone makes any assumptions. And for the Deku part, here's what's really interesting. Deku combined One for All 45%, and he basically combined like with Black Whip, and also Float, and also Fujin at 100%. Don't worry, because like All Might was being able to do that without any other quirks. He just did it with raw power. That's why I'm saying like Deku. That's one of the reasons actually like why I'm saying Deku is still not as powerful as Prime All Might. He might have surpassed like the weakened All Might in some sort of way. Like he's maybe stronger than him a little bit, but he's still not yet at like Prime All Might level. Alright, from here on out, I'll be breaking down some spoilers regarding the manga, so if you haven't read the manga or you just don't want to get spoiled, then feel free to skip this part. So, the next quirk, or the final quirk that we are going to talk about, is basically Gear Shift. A quirk that's really interesting, and combined with the other quirks can make a really powerful tool. For those of you who doesn't know what Gear Shift is, it's basically kind of like a quirk that enhances something's movement. In the past, in like the first user's usage of it, he was basically able to like make a bullet faster, because his quirk was still new, he was still pretty weak. But in Deku's state, he's being able to charge his own arm to make his punch or like his whole body faster than it already is, right? Like let's say, for example, he's traveling at like 50% of One for All. The Gear Shift charges like One for All from like 50% to like 120, 150%. So it like enhances the owner's speed or power by multiple times. And that doesn't like discard just like to speed, it discard to power itself. Like it's for speed and power. It can enhance anything. So that's where the interesting part comes in. This comes in at a price though, and that is the person who's like using the Gear Shift quirk doesn't have a lot of time to kind of like use it like for unlimited amount of times, right? Like he have just like 5 minutes, and we saw that at the War Arc. So that was really interesting, because Deku was being able like to use a punch of like 120% of One for All, and a quantable Detroit Smash, which is basically 4 punches or 4 attacks of Detroit Smash at the same time at Shigaraki's body. Now, putting all this information combined, we now have kind of like a clear idea on how powerful Deku is. The current powerful Deku can use about 120% of One for All. He's not using like 120% of One for All on his own. The quirks combined all together, and I want to make this very clear because a lot of people kind of like misinterpreted the message there. Deku is not using 120% of One for All alone. All of his quirks combined with One for All is like accountable or like equals to 120% of One for All. So that's pretty interesting. Now, putting all those information together, how powerful the current Deku really is, the manga one that we're talking about. Well, basically, the current Deku is basically a city level character. Now, I know that a lot of people might seem like a little bit like, I think he's a little bit more powered than that. In his future state, I think he will even like surpass Prime All Might himself. But out of like this moment right now, the current Deku is like faster than sound, but like multiple times. He's like maybe able to travel like at 10-20,000 kilometers per hour. And he's basically a city level character, despite like from the punch itself, because if they weren't like restoring the UA stage itself, the UA stage will probably have fallen and like caused massive shockwaves because of like the whole quantable Detroit Smash punch. I'm kind of like surprised that they were able to like regenerate it on time and get the stage or the stadium back again. Now, for the 20,000 kilometers per hour speed that we're talking about, that's not like his current speed, because like he's kind of like combining it with Gear Shift itself, and we know that a lot of people seem to like kind of like tell like why Deku was so weak, why was he so slow to get like to the UA stadium, but there is a reason. The One for All users kind of like told him, do not use my quirk until we are at the final battle, because he could have used that and boosted like his speed for like, I don't know, like 10,000 kilometers an hour, right? Like he could have done that. But I feel like he didn't use that because he wanted like to save that for Shigaraki himself, because we know that Shigaraki alone is like a threat to the entire world at the moment if he's like let loose, so Deku have to stop him with all he's got. So that's why where the final basically stages are put together, I think the current manga Deku is at city level and faster than sound. He's like maybe at 20 30,000 kilometers per hour with like all of his quirks combined. I'm talking about gear shift, Fujin, everything charged to like 100%, and he like flies at like maximum speed. I think he's like 30,000 kilometers per hour at max, and I think he's city level. I do feel like that in his prime state, I feel like he will be able to be at planet level. Now, in my All Might video, I did say that All Might is basically like an Iceland level. He can basically destroy large cities with one punch. But like, in Deku's case, I feel like in his prime state, he will be able to like one-shot, big Icelands, right? Like, he will be able to destroy the Earth, or, kind of like go beyond that, maybe even. But I feel like in terms of Horikoshi's writing, I don't feel like he's going with that stage. I feel like when he's making the story, he's making it a little bit grounded, which something, I don't agree with, but, it's his story, so I do love what he's writing and what he have written so far. But in Deku's case, I feel like he won't we won't actually like see him like going in that terms of massive destruction. But that's my take on how powerful Deku is. If you have any other opinion, I would love to hear it. And if you disagree, that's also fine. Everyone have his own opinion. I do appreciate you guys stopping by and watching this video. And we are at almost like 2K, which is pretty awesome, 2,000 people. So thank you guys so much for the awesome support that you have sent me over the last years. And I hope I can like do my best in the next years as well. Anyway, I have been the Manga Viewer, and I'll see you all next time.